Hello! So today I just wanted to do a quick video on an issue I've been seeing with the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro coupled with cinema lenses, and why they might not go together quite as well as you might think. Now first, let's go over a little background. Traditionally, cinema cameras in general use a lens mount called the PL mount. Now this is actually a dead mount, so it means it doesn't transmit data, however it is an absolutely rock solid mount. So that means it can hold large durable cinema lenses without much issue. Now this mount was originally developed by Arri in 1982, and it replaced their traditional bayonet style mount that had been used on cameras previous. The mount itself was primarily designed for 16mm or 35mm cameras, however it's still used to this day and is basically the cinema lens standard. So briefly, what sets apart the PL mount that has made it the standard for so long? Well, basically a PL mount allows you to line up the lens and then secure a tightening ring around the lens itself from the body. This allows for a variety of manufacturing tolerances because it's not just a click-in system, it is literally something that tightens around the lens. Now this locking ring itself keeps lenses rock solid. However, as I said before, PL mounts don't transmit data, which means autofocus through a lens mount itself is basically going to be impossible with them. Having been developed when the film cameras had supremacy, unfortunately that means that the flange distance on this lens mount system was larger than a lot of lens mount systems that are coming out today. Just for quick reference, the flange distance is actually the distance from the lens mount to the sensor plane or film plane. Now, for obvious reasons, in the past the flange distance had to be larger just because there were more mechanical pieces moving through, whether it was a rotating shutter or a mirror flipping down. There basically had to be enough space for the mechanical shutters of the time. However, with mirrorless becoming more and more prevalent, this flange distance is now thankfully shrinking. However, the flange distance getting shorter comes with one exception, and that has to do with internal NDs. Unfortunately, these are mechanical systems that go in front of the sensor, and that can mean that a super small flange distance isn't always necessarily possible. One camera that actually gets around this is the Sony FX6, which still has a variable ND in front, while also utilizing the E-mount. Now, let's take a look at how Blackmagic handled the lens mounting system on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro. But before we do, if you have time and enjoy the video, a like is, as always, very much appreciated. If you want to see more like this, a subscription is also very much appreciated. But if not, that dislike button works extra well if you hit it twice. Okay, so with the PL mount still front of mind, let's go ahead and take a look at how Blackmagic handled the lens mounting system on the Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro. Keep in mind the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro is marketed as a cinema camera, and although that's pretty hotly debated, let's go ahead and go with their claims for the sake of argument. Now, with cinema cameras, traditionally people like to go with cinema lenses, and that's simply because they have hard stops, they're usually pretty good glass, and they're pretty durable. Now, I know a lot of filmmakers, especially here on YouTube, like to say that they use consumer level glass, and that can be fine for solo shooters. However, once you want to get serious about pulling focus, cinema lenses are basically your only option. So you might be thinking, why can't I just get a cinema lens with an EF mount and pop it on the 6K Pro and boom, there's no issues? Well, here's the problem. The EF mount really wasn't designed to hold that much weight, and because EF mount lenses are manufactured by quite a few different manufacturers, the actual lens mount tolerances themselves aren't great. So on top of not being able to hold a ton of weight, they also have a slight rotational shift back and forth that can actually result in your image jumping whenever you want to focus it. Now, this can be fixed with something like a lens support to kind of hold the lens more in place, especially if you can screw it into the bottom of the lens. However, not every lens has this support, and it does make changing lenses quite a bit more difficult. After some lens changes during the day, this can end up eating a good amount of time. Just to give you an idea, as a professional camera assistant, I usually at least change lenses 5 times a day just to get various shots that the DP wants. Now, I do need to admit that this camera more than likely won't be used as an A cam on many productions. However, I could definitely see it being used as a B or even a C camera, and perhaps even a crash camera. So it is something that production might still have to deal with. Now, jumping back into film, the EF mount actually was originally designed as a film lens mount. So that means that, similar to the PL mount, the flange distance is slightly longer than something more modern. So it is around 44 millimeters, which isn't terrible, and I believe that's actually what the new LPL mount uses. But having a longer flange distance in the system means you can't really adapt any shorter flange distance lenses to this camera system, so that means basically no mirrorless lenses are going to work with this system. And as mirrorless become more and more prevalent, this I think is going to become more and more of an issue. Having seen that Red has recently switched to the RF, or the new Canon mirrorless mount, for their Komodo, means that professionals are now taking this mount seriously, even if it only means that it can now be adapted to a variety of different lens types. So now onto the solution. Now there is actually a way to convert the EF mount on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro to a PL mount, which is fantastic if you only use PL mount lenses. However, it's a big pain if you want to change it back to EF, and not to mention that the threads that the screws are actually screwed into is, I believe, on the sensor block itself and just drilled into plastic, which means you can only do this lens mount change a certain number of times before the sensor block itself will become too weak, and that will lead to the overall camera failing. So what other solutions are there? Well, unfortunately, aside from a lens support, there's not really a whole lot we can do right now. I'm pretty sure the only solution is going to be for Blackmagic to hopefully at some point redesign it, and I have some ideas I want to throw out. There is a PL style EF mount, which basically means that rather than having the EF mount lens go onto the camera and then twist, you line up the lens and then you twist a locking ring around the lens itself. And these EF mounts are actually currently being manufactured by people like Arri as well as Kipper Tie, which is a lens adapter company. Now the interesting thing with the Kipper Tie adapter is it actually goes from RF to EF and then allows for the locking mount on the EF, but it also comes with a cage so that you can lock the actual adapter to the cage. So it's kind of nice in that regard. And so that actually leads me to my second solution. If Blackmagic actually wanted to transition away from the EF mount, as I think they eventually should do, because then it would allow you to adapt way more lenses onto this camera, if they did end up going with a lens mount such as the RF mount, then we could take an adapter such as the Kipper Tie adapter and put it on the front and convert to EF mount or whatever mount we desire. I do think that as the market kind of transitions away from EF, it's going to be harder and harder to find those lenses, and with the flange distances getting shorter anyway, it's going to be more advantageous to eventually upgrade to cameras that have those shorter flange distance systems already built in. However, once again, I do suspect that Blackmagic can't necessarily make the jump immediately, as I do think their internal ND system is going to take a little bit to shrink to allow that flange distance to shrink overall. But in the meantime, maybe a locking EF mount at some point? Now, let me know what your thoughts are, or if you think I'm just an old man yelling at the clouds. If you have any questions, let me know down below, or hit me up on Instagram, as I'm much more likely to respond quickly there. But anyway, that's all I have. As always, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.